red jacket on.
What's your name?
Jonah.
What's the relationship between you and the boy?
Not an easy ride either. No, sister. Life is long. This is not the end.
Goeienaand allemaal, good evening everybody, and welcome to this third in a series of discussions around the film you've just seen, the trailer of Thamm by Levenberg. There's been a lot of tributaries that have come out of this extraordinary film, which traces the life of 4 or 5 people in one night in Cape Town and their interconnectedness, but also just in a world that is inhospitable and how they have to live their lives out in this particular realm. There's many layers to it, and tonight we're going to be discussing an aspect of the film which is in the background, as many other aspects are, and that is what we're not saying about gender-based violence in men. What is it we're not talking about? And we've got 3 guests this evening, and I'd like to sort of usher them all into the cyber arena. And it's Dr. Chiv Gordon, who's a medical educator. Hi, Siobhan, welcome. Nice to see you. We've got one of our great acting icons, Jill Levenberg, who plays a role in this film as well. You can't miss her. And lastly, we have Sherman Pharo, who is, I suppose, a gender activist and who has spoken about his own journey coming to terms with domestic abuse, growing up with domestic abuse. And so all of you, I'm hoping, will be able to do some input into that main question that we're looking at tonight, which is what is it we're not saying about gender-based violence, gewelds, geslachtsgeweld, like they say in Afrikaans. I think Jill's gone black. I'm not sure what's happened. I hope you are there, Jill, and that you're not struggling with Eskom in one way or another. But I think let me start off with you, Siobhan, in terms of you're a medical educator, and what is your experience around what we're not saying about gender-based violence?
Thanks, Marianne. So, yeah, just to contextualize myself a little bit more, I am a medical doctor, but I'm responsible for teaching medical students, and I work in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Groote Schuur. So I work with women all the time. I think one of the things that we're not saying, or perhaps another way to say it, is that the way we are having this conversation is incorrect, and we need to change the script. So when we conceptualize, when we think about intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, we talk about, why the woman doesn't leave a relationship, or what a victim of a sexual assault did that could have led to that sexual assault. So we focus on the victim and what the victim or survivor has done wrong in the eyes of the broader public. And we are not having the discussion about why do perpetrators perpetrate? Why do they continue to perpetrate? Why do they behave in these ways? And what can we do to actually address that behavior instead of constantly focusing on getting the woman out of a violent situation, or, us having to look over our shoulders all the time to avoid behaviors that are being perpetrated by mostly men. So I think it's not so much what's not being said, it's about how it's being said and how the narrative is unplaying. And I think that is unacceptable. And it's also passive. When we talk about violence against women, it's something that just kind of happens. It just kind of happens out of nowhere. No, it's being perpetrated by someone, a particular person. And I think we need to shift the way we speak about it as a kind of a first point that I would like to make.
And perhaps also how we intervene with it, in a sense, about how do we contextualize why it is men globally. And these figures are not just South Africa. I think, if you see France, Brazil, Europe, all over Europe, America, gender-based violence is on the rise in every country in the world. So there is a broader discussion to be had here, perhaps also within a political context. But I just wanted to quickly move to you, Sherman, in terms of just give us a little bit of background about your own experience and your thoughts on how we should be framing this. It's a femicide. It's a murder of a larger percentage, or we're being targeted. The majority in populations in the world. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Op een van die dag, I think my first memory in life is violence. I said it in my TED talk. I did it at the hashtag Just Men show that I did at Baxter. My first memory of life when I think back is my mom sitting in the rain outside the house, holding her face, and when I took her hands away from her at the age of 3, there was just blood gushing from her nose and her mouth and things. So for me, it's a thing that I grew up with that. And I saw it happening constantly. And at the end of the day, no one ever spoke out. And that was where the problem was, because my father's friends would come, my mother's friends would be there, but no one ever spoke to my father saying, but listen, what you are doing is wrong. Mm-hmm. Everyone just turned a blind eye, and I think that's why it continues. Throughout this whole world, I mean, statistically, it shows that over 243 million women and children are being sexually or physically abused throughout the world yearly. And that the reason why it's not stopping is because us as men or as a population, we don't speak out. We don't say, no, it's wrong. And why are you doing this? No, it can't happen. We just turn a blind eye. And I think that's where the problem lies at the end of the day.
Okay, that makes sense. But Jill's just left the room, and I wanted to really actually address the question to her, because I think while she's out of the room, let's play a short clip in the film where this, what you say about people not speaking out or not knowing or claiming not to know or pretending not to know is evidenced in this particular clip.
Jy weet nie hoe dit is nie, Davie. Glo my. En as jy het en jy staan nog steeds voor ons werk daaraan, is jy net so fucking sleg soos hy. Ek hoef nie myself aan jou te verduidelik nie, jy gaan in elk geval alles uit.
Nee, wag, easy, wow. Kas het gesê ek moet kom. Hy het gesê hy is bekommerd oor jou, so ek is hier om te help.
Jy word nodig nie. Wat ek nodig het, is dat jy fucking...
Nee, easy, nee man. Kom ek help jou.
Nee, wag.
Laat ek sien. Laat ek sien.
Gaan ek lag teen hom lê. Maar dis hoekom jy hier is, nee. Om te smeek om Cassie se hand te hou.
Nee, ek het nie hiervan geweet nie.
Whatever, Davie, ek is klaar.
Ek het nie hiervan geweet nie.
Whatever.
Yeah, let's go. Jill, are you back with us?
I seem to be popping in and out. Can you see me?
We can't see you, but I'd love to hear you. I mean, I don't want you to disappear again. I'd love to. I mean, Ellen Pakkies was also a film about cyclical violence and that ends in further violence and trauma. And tell me a little bit about your role in this film and your thoughts around the experience of this and the idea of gender-based violence in South Africa and what do you think we're not saying?
Right. So, am I correct in saying that you can hear me, but you can't see me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay, great. I'm glad you can at least hear me. Look, basically, I think it starts in the home. It starts, when kids first start getting socialized, the way girls are socialized, the way boys are socialized. It starts there. And from a very, very early age, it's embedded in violence is embedded in our language, and the way it starts is what we let slide. the in-house jokes between boys, the way that boys are allowed to kind of get away with things when they're taunting girls or kind of teasing girls or kind of that kind of thing. It's when something happens and it's a kind of a group dynamic and you let things slide. That's something that I want to pick on first and foremost. How boys should be socialized at home, that you do not let these things slide. You do not turn a blind eye. I mean, not only boys, girls too. You know what I mean? Are you still with me? Can you still hear me?
We can hear you. We can. And it's a very important input that you're making here.
Yes, yeah. And then again, it's embedded in our language. I feel that everything starts with our words and the way that we speak to one another, and the way that we do not speak to one another. And from a personal experience, it starts with the man being verbally and vocally violent with you. That's where it starts. There's economic violence, where he may withhold money, for example, if there's a household where the woman is dependent on him for money. So it's all these little power struggles. So he withholds money, for example, and then, for example, he will start verbally and emotionally abusing her. That starts long before the physical abuse starts.
Yeah.
And that is accepted. It's generally accepted. And it starts in our language, and that is my most important, in case we lose one another again, that is my most important point here, is it starts with the way that we speak to one another, in our homes, in schools, and what we let slide. And in when you let one thing slide, it gets easier to let bigger things go by, and to turn a blind eye, for example. And it's our social responsibility, all of our social responsibility, to not turn a blind eye and to not let things slide. That is my most important point.
Okay. I think what you've said here is very interesting to me, because in a way Donald Trump represents I think everything in a way around language and the use of language and the othering of people and the creation of a milieu which is violent and in which there are oppositional forces. But you speak about, Joel, and any of you can pick up on this, that it starts in the home, but surely those values in the home are then placed there either through culture, either through religion, through your beliefs. I mean, the United States has a particular, Trump is there because there are people like Trump who says he can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and grab a woman by her pussy. I mean, this is the man who has been elected the leader of the United States of America. So what we need to also understand in South Africa is that the violence that women experience here is doubled down because of, I think, hundreds of years of different kinds of political oppressions and violations, and it's got caught up in that. But so it starts in the home, but what is feeding the home? If any of you can think. I mean, Sherman, what fed your home? What fed the values, or what would your father have said he was an upstanding man in society?
It's a difficult question to answer, but I think my dad has never seen himself do anything wrong. Because I spoke to him just after I did my show 2 years ago, and I went to him and I said to him, but why did you do what you did? And in his eyes, he's never done anything wrong. He believes that he's an upstanding guy, and it's almost as though my mom deserved the punishment.
And how did he justify it? Did he say culturally, I'm the head of the household, the family belongs to me, or religiously, I was made first, a woman comes second? Was it just something he picked up in the air around him because it comes at young girls and boys, like a machine, the Disney movies, the American TV shows. I mean, the narratives we see all around us. So it's not only just the church you go to, or the mosque you go to, or the shul you go to, or, where you hear these things about women. But in your father's case, was it just generally the world he lived in?
I think, because I remember his mom. And I think it's a thing of how you are raised, and there's a cycle, because I don't think he really knows his dad personally. His dad passed away when he was young, so I think it's the society that he grew up in, and it seemed that it was the right thing, and that's the way it was supposed to be. And in my case, it was also where when I started getting that anger within me, that I decided that I need to break away from that and break the cycle and the chain of abuse. Because I didn't like the way my mom was being treated through the years that I've known that she was alive. And I always said to myself that I would be the change. And that I will treat women better, and that I will tell men when they are wrong.
So what is it about you that you were able to have that insight and not perpetuate the violence? Because you did find some violence in yourself in response to your father and in response to being a boy who wasn't able to help his mother. You took out your rage in a gang and thought, I'll be strong here. But what was the moment where you can understand in your head, you went, but none of this is going to work unless I actually fix the problem, you know?
Like my mom passed away when I was 17 years old. And after that, I had a lot of anger within me, and I had a lot of rage, and I took it out on a lot of men. And I think most of them deserved it, and I'm not proud of it. But,
but
at the end of the day, I need to, I'm still working on my anger. Because when I do see a man disrespecting a woman, something flares up inside of me, and even if I don't know you, I'll go and I'll say, listen, that's not the way. It's not right. And I'll stand up for the woman. And I speak out. And at the end of the day, also, I just said to myself that I would never treat a woman the way my father treated my mother. Because I would have, my mother was a queen, and as I believe that all women are queens, and they should be treated as. So I think it's also something within yourself that if you put all women on a plateau of, they are on the same level as the respect that I have for my mother, that's the way all women should be respected, I think then you as a person will change and break the cycle.
That's a lot to have to deal with, in a sense, losing your mommy so young as well, you know. But she'd be proud of you. I just wanted to say that. Wherever she is, she'd be very proud of you. Siobhan, anything to add?
Yeah. Thanks, Sherman. I think it's so useful having somebody to reflect the personal experience. And I think what I would like to contribute is more from a sort of the evidence base, the research base about why in South Africa in particular we have so much gender-based violence. And it is all of those things that everyone has already mentioned. It is the patriarchy, it is the toxic masculinity. We are a very conservative religious country which views women as having certain specific roles. But we also have a major problem with substances, particularly alcohol. And alcohol is one of the number one drivers of gender-based violence, of all violence, but we're talking about gender-based violence now. So that is one big issue. And another thing that we are still having to reconcile, and I don't know how we're going to do this, but we are still having to deal with the after effects of apartheid in many ways. And what happened during that time, obviously, was the enfranchisement of a huge sector of the population, the complete rupturing of families, the migrant workers, the increased alcohol abuse, and that rage that was so violently crushed by the government at the time. Those men who were so powerless in society, for many of them, the only place where they've perhaps felt that they could assert themselves, this is according to thousands of interviews and the research that there is that rage, fear, and powerlessness was meted out upon their closest people, and as a maladaptive response to the horrible brutality of apartheid. So that sort of disintegration of the family as a unit, the introduction of alcohol as a self-medication to deal with the horrific stressors around, have got a huge role to play in the current statistics that we see in gender-based violence, which is not just to say that it is, I don't mean to say that it is only people of certain racial groups by any means. Anyone can be a perpetrator and anyone can be a victim. But apartheid has got a lot to answer for in this country in terms of the legacy that's been left behind, of the brutality that was out there that was then just filtered into every aspect of life.
Jill, I'm very glad you're back again. We keep seeing you going and coming, and I'm hoping that you're able to keep a thread going on where this conversation has gone. Tell us a little bit about your role in STUM and what the film, perhaps, how it spoke to you.
Yeah, I keep on slipping in and out here. So I just have another. I have another valuable thing that I really want to say before, in case you might lose me again. Okay. Firstly, I definitely on the legacy that apartheid has lost, has left. It's got a very big role to play. But I have another. If I may bring in an example, I have a friend who recently was so badly abused by her husband that she was left unconscious. And, this is something that I find, I was speaking about boys and the socialization of girls and boys earlier on, and how violence starts, with our language and the words that we say and that we don't say. But something very, very important that stuck out for me with this friend of mine was how the women in her family encouraged her to go back to her husband. This was after, she was found by the security guards of their flat and was taken to hospital. And then...
Oh no. I'm so sorry to have lost Joel there right at that point around how women are often, I would like to say, suffer from a sort of Stockholm syndrome in a way, where the relationship, this complexity. Yes, Sherman.
No, I just wanted to reiterate on the. Okay, I think Jill's coming back now.
Jill's coming back.
Okay. So just before I disappear, I'm so sorry. I don't know what the connection problem is, but the women in her family continued to encourage her. She had him jailed. He was jailed she made a case against him. If the security guards had not found her, she would have died. But the women, because she's married to this man, the women in her family have continued to encourage her to stay with him for the sake of the children, to stay with him, obviously to save face, etc., etc., etc. And just as much as sometimes men perpetrate these cycles, the women do too. In terms of what it might look like outside to society if you divorce, if you do not make your marriage successful, etc., etc., etc. So that is a very, very important point that I just have to mention in case we lose one another again.
Yeah, no, it's extremely important point. I mean, those pressures of society on women, as you said earlier, that it comes at people from everywhere, from the TV we watch to the apps we look at to the ads we see. Those things all seep in, and women believe. I mean, there's also the economic aspect of what people regard a marriage to be, a sort of value to value exchange in some way. There's this old-fashioned notion that men earn an income and women are dependent on them, or if women earn the income, they need to share it. But a man must never be made to feel less than a man. We should always reflect men back to themselves twice as big as they are. I don't know where that came from. And when men, interestingly enough, in this film, you see the damage that apartheid has done to white men in terms of robbing them of their capacity to be tender and to connect with others. And actually, I really hope you can stay with us, Jill. Excuse me. But perhaps we should look at the second clip of two brothers who confront each other. The one confronting the other brother, older brother, who beats his wife. So let's have a look at these two at this particular clip.
Yeah.
Los uit, jou stuk kak.
Stuk kak. Ek.
'n stuk fucking kak. Ek. Jesus, Dawie. Ek weet nie wat 'n fucking storie jy vir jouself spin oor hoe jy ewe skielik 'n fucking vooraanstaande lid van die fucking gemeenskap geword het nie, maar jy's in my huis nou, hoor jy vir my? Jy onthou nie, fuck. Wie het vir ma gered? Toe hy haar so gebliksem het, sy kon nie haar fucking oë oopmaak nie, Onthou jy? Los dit. Onthou jy? Sy het vir ons skoolbroodjies gemaak, ou, met fucking peanut butter. Maar sy het vir die mes laat val, onthou jy wie het haar gered? Onthou jy? Los dit. Nee, dit was ek, doos. Ek het haar gefucking red, terwyl jy op die bank gesit met jou hande oor die fucking oortjies en MacGyver kyk, onthou jy?
Wat was ek veronderstel om te doen, hè?
Fokol! Dawie, want jy fucking jy's fokol.
Very difficult to watch. You know, there's many such trauma. Those performances for me are just so unbelievably. The whole film has a tension that runs through it the whole time. All these people's lives are stressed, and all of them are trying to get by. Siobhan, your feelings on that particular clip, and also Sherman, you know that as well, the cyclical nature of that abuse.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Sherman has already illustrated the profound intergenerational burden that intimate partner violence does cause, whether the children are physically abused or whether they are witnessing the abuse. There are untold ramifications, psychologically, medically, across the board. But something I want to pick up on maybe later, maybe after the others have spoken, is that we focused a lot on physical violence, but there is so much more that we need to talk about in terms of the psychological violence, because intimate partner violence is actually a psychological crime. So I don't know if you want to just finish on this section now, but that is something that I think people really need to understand if we are going to actually advance this cause.
Jill, before you go again, I don't know, I can see you wanted to say something there.
Sorry, I'm just trying to listen.
Oh, Shan, sorry, Jill. I'm so sorry. No, you and your connection, but because you've got valuable, I think, Siobhan, just carry on with that aspect, because it's led into it.
Yeah, so I think
if I may say, I'm trying to hear what you're saying, but something that I think is also very important is that mostly, as Sherman was saying earlier on, how it gets passed from generation to generation. Do what you see, you don't do what you're told to do. You know what I'm saying? So, I think something that is grossly lacking is our ability to communicate. I don't think that we are socialized to really communicate through our issues. A lot of the time, people, I don't think that I think we need more classes in schools. We need more places. We need more spaces for people to be able to talk through and to talk to, because most people have not learned that has not been passed from generation to generation. They've only seen what their mother has done, seen what, hulle swyg miskien because the mother doesn't talk. So that is what you learn to do. You learn to be passive aggressive. And that is definitely something that is grossly lacking, is the fact that we just don't know how to be honest and transparent and speak to one another, and speak through our issues. So, yeah.
Sherman, you had your hand up there.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to bring in connection with the scene that was played now. It takes me home. Growing up, I remember there was a scene before that where he comes in and the lady's laying on the floor and she's hurting. I mean, those that's the footage that I grew up in that. And the thing is that it's sad that the women don't want to leave, because mostly it's because of a financial situation where they don't know where they're gonna stay, where they're gonna go with their children. Sometimes they just stay because of the children, because of the financial gain of having a house, having food to eat, having stability for the children. But I'm still going through that because, as I said in my TED talk, that I told my mother many a time, Mommy, let's leave. And the answer was always, where do we go? Waar toe gaan ons my kind? You know, so I think that's the problem, is that there is institutes that do help, but I think that there's not enough institutes and organizations that's helping the abused, that's helping these women. And then they're not, if there is a lot, that they're not advertising enough. They're not putting it out there to say, you can come to us. We are here, we can help. I think that's where the problem lies, because most of these women are scared and they don't know where to go to.
I agree with you completely. If I may interject there.
So, just as she interjected, Siobhan, you were going to say something. We can speak about emotional abuse.
Well, no, I'll pick up on what Sherman was saying in terms of shelters and where to go. There is a grave lack of shelters for women wanting to leave relationships. And I think, so certainly where to go and the financial dependence are very definite factors in that. But one of the extremely potent reasons to stay is that the highest risk time is when you leave or when you announce that you want to leave. That's when women are murdered. Women are murdered, the 75% of intimate femicide happens within the first 3 months of a woman having left a relationship. So that is an incredibly potent reason not to leave, because you know that you could end up in a body bag, and women know what that risk is. And that could all happen without the perpetrator ever having laid a hand on a woman. There's more and more evidence that just stalking, harassment, intimidation, those kinds of things where you don't lay a finger on someone, but those are the kinds of behaviors that lead to domestic homicides. So again, it's the physical violence is definitely there, but physical violence normally happens after, as Jill was saying, the verbal and psychological abuse predates the physical abuse by years, and it escalates and escalates and it escalates, and it reaches that point. And in clinical practice, only about 9% of the time when women or victims do seek help, only about 9% of the time is there physical evidence when there is actually intimate partner violence playing out in the home. So we have to move away. We can't have the conversation if we think that the conversation is only to be had when there's evidence of physical violence, because there's so many other types of violence that you can't see and that are potentially deadly and that keep women trapped in those situations.
Yeah, Sherman.
I also feel that as a man, I have sat in companies where a man says, "Ja, ek het gestaan hom gemoor." And then the other men are like, "Ja, jy moet verwys wie se man." And I think that's where the problem lies, is that as soon as it becomes a no-no, where we as men say, "No, that's not the way. How can you lift your hands to your woman?" Then it will change things. I think we as men, we have so much part in this. Even if we don't hit our own woman in our lives that we love, if we don't speak out against it, we are with it and for it. And I think that's where the point must come, where, as if you hear a man saying it, you must actually say to him, "You know what? You can't call yourself a man for doing that." And the more men do that, the more they'll see that that's not the way it should be. I think that's where the change will come. But I also feel that, as the doctor was saying, that women are scared to leave, because I think SAPs and all the institutions and things, they don't provide enough security for women.
They don't.
Because when you leave, you know that my husband is going to come, he's going to kill me for leaving. Yeah. And you go to police station and they say, "But well, he has to physically first do something before we can help." Or they have all these things. And I think it's just a time where SAPs and all these institutions should pay more attention to women and helping them to escape this the situations they are in.
You know what I always thought was so interesting around after Uyanene's brutal murder in the post office, that, you know, Becky Clearly and everyone came out, and then they all tell us that we've got these sexual offences courts. But as you say, I mean, Jill, you mentioned your friend and SAPS and how SAPS doesn't behave. I mean, there surely, you know, has to be a way to set up a special offences unit. You know, that's it doesn't take that much. The people are there. There is a family unit, but it's, you know, I speak to somebody like Monique Stradom, who supplies rape kits and helps the cops on the ground with an NGO. They just don't have sometimes cell phone data. So, you know, the government comes with, we've got an interesting array of laws that are there around sexual offences, and I see that there's going to be less bail for perpetrators. But unless the SAPS have a specific unit in each charge office who can deal with the woman dealing with domestic violence or rape or any other gender-based violence, you're going to get the treatment. And unless the police know we're watching them. So that's why Lucilla Evans, I also think, says we must go to our police stations. All of us is just go up the road and say, you know, who's on duty here? If you find resistance from the cops, they need to be told no. You know, I'd like this area. So in a sense, we have the laws, but there's no political will, and we need to find a way to get SAPS actually doing the work, you know, getting women to report back. And there are a lot of NGOs doing that, you know, trying to track what SAPS is doing. But you're right, until men know that there's a price to pay, one way or another, and that it doesn't get taken out on the woman. So if you are a neighbor and you hear a woman next door being beaten up, you can be charged. You know, you could be held responsible for not helping that person. If the cops refuse to come, they can be charged. You know, we need to teach people our rights in terms of what the SAPS need to do, and we understand they're under-resourced, and we understand they're selling guns to the gangsters, but there's some good cops there. And so the thing is, you know, I think civil pushback, civil society pushback, and the work that all of you are doing, this film, Siobhan, your work, Jill, your work, Sherman, your work, all of this should lead us towards making these laws actually concrete. I mean, Siobhan, do you find in the medical profession the laws that in the people you deal with, that SAPS doesn't really help? And we'll get you now, Sherman.
I must say, there definitely are good people out there, but I think that women or any victim of domestic violence is more likely to find obstruction and a lack of help in a police station. And in fact, the guidance that I give to, the training that I give to my medical students is, if somebody does want to go the legal route, it's probably better and less traumatic to go to a magistrate's court and get a protection order than to go to a police station and get charged. But
that also needs
nothing to. There isn't the system isn't there to affect the laws, and also I listen to a lot of international sort of people talking about domestic violence, and the way it stands at the moment is that we are trying to provide for taking the woman out of the abusive situation. We're not talking about taking the perpetrator out of the abusive situation. Why should the woman and children have to leave the home? So again, what I started with is that the narrative, the lens is wrong. So the laws that we have are to take somebody out of that violent situation, to protect them from that perpetrator in ways that are not working and maybe actually are just not fair on the person who's experiencing the violence.
Are there any places in the world where there are interventions that actually do secure the home for the victim and where the perpetrator? I mean, do we have any examples of where it works?
I have a feeling that there's one place somewhere that I read about in passing, but I can't actually now remember. But yeah, nothing that leaps to mind. And I think in the vast majority, it is completely the other way around.
Isn't that interesting that we're still in that space in the world globally, that the woman must get out of the house and the
woman must be with the children, and she must find the money to find somewhere to be safe, and she must uproot herself, and she must, if she's being stalked, she must find a new place to live, a new job, a new whatever, and the perpetrator can carry on as if nothing's ever happened. It's completely unacceptable.
Sherman, have you got anything to add, or Joel?
No, I just wanted to say that I think it's very easy to turn a blind eye. Now, when you're hearing your neighbor beating his wife and just being like, it's not my business, I'm out of this. But I mean, even if you just go and bang on the door and then run away, you're placing a disturbance within that. And if you do that every day, this person's gonna know, the perpetrator's gonna know, oh, but someone knows, so I need to stop. If you hear your neighbor throw a rock on the roof, every time you hear him start screaming or something, just to stop it from happening. I mean, you have to intervene somehow, and if you physically can't do it, you can knock and say, listen, we know about it. Do something in what I was saying, is bang on the door, throw something on the roof, just so that these people know that there are people that's hearing this.
But often I think people are afraid to intervene because they themselves get hurt then, because often a perpetrator in mid-rage, either with a weapon of some sort or a firearm, can really hurt quite a few people. But that shouldn't stop us from trying to in some way diffuse the situation, or I think the SAPs need to learn how to diffuse the situation and remove that perpetrator from there. But a lot of South Africans do intervene, and I've seen it, and it does make a difference. So I'm not saying, but I think we are scared because those kind of violent men in that moment will just take out anybody. It's there was a question earlier on whether there are any programs for perpetrators where you've seen some effect in terms of rehabilitation or a shift in mind in terms of changing of behavior.
Sherman, I'm not sure if you can speak to that. I know of one NGO, and there are probably more. Mosaic in runs a program for families, including the perpetrators. And I don't know what their results are like or what their stats are like, but I really like their model because of the fact that they bring the perpetrator in to be accountable for their actions, and they give intensive therapy. But I don't know whether I don't know to what extent things change.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of smaller men's groups trying to do work, wherever they can. I've seen quite a few of those, which is very heartening. Sherman?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I love my father. Nevertheless, what he did and how we grew up and things, I'm angry about it most of the time, but I love him, and I've realized that he actually has a problem. So for me, I think if the perpetrator can go into a type of program to help them mentally and emotionally to get rid of all the anger and learn how to behave better and work with the situation, it will definitely change a lot of people's lives. So I think that government or the law system or SAPS or somewhere, they need to bring it in that if they see that there is a problem, that you must go into these programs. And you cannot go back to the house until you've completed 2 months, 3 months or whatever of the program that's needed, that's been given to you. And I think that will make a big difference in the lives of many people.
I agree. I think we need to re-educate a lot of men in more adaptive ways to express frustration and hurt, and because as the saying goes, hurt people hurt people. So probably the majority of perpetrators can be rehabilitated if they can be guided through a process. I mean, some people are profoundly disordered and psychopathic and will never rehabilitate, but I think the majority of people, it's what Jill and Sherman have been saying. It's been inherited from generation after generation after generation of witnessing things happen. And we need to change that. We need to re-educate. This is what I think things like life orientation at school should be for. I don't know what they teach kids in life orientation, because they certainly don't know about contraception by the time they get to me. And that would be like a main thing. But I think we need to allow men to emote. We need to give them alternative means of having those very overpowering, strong emotions so that they don't get taken out on the people closest to you, because one always behaves the worst towards the people closest to you because you feel safe with that person, and things are unmasked. So there needs to be a massive re-education and realignment of how of what is acceptable masculinity, because we have a very dominant sort of norm of what masculinity is, and it's an oak and a brew and a this, but that's just not going to cut it anymore. We need to give people permission to have that kind of communication that Jill was talking about, to be able to talk about difficult things and to be sad and not go to violence as the first port of call.
And I think just Professor Kupala Ratebe, who's a psychologist, was also just saying for men to men aren't given tools through which to work with what it feels like, what it means in your particular society to be seen as a man, to unpack what does that actually mean, because toxic masculinity is bad for men and women. Absolutely. It's as bad for it costs society millions every year. You know, it is one of the most pressing health needs. And what I always try and say to men is just on a genetic level that men forget that there is a woman inside them, the X that their mother left them, the XY chromosomes. You know, us women, we only have XX chromosomes in our DNA. You as men have X and Y. So you determine the sex of the child if you have a child. You've got your mother in you. She's in you. Every man has a woman in her or a part of a woman in her. And I think we should begin teaching that to men, that you carry a woman in you. And I just think the hostility I often think how hard it must be to be a good man in a very brutal society where men like, Trump make jokes like that, because you become a target. It's a very powerful, violent, it's rule by fear. That's what it is, rule by fear. And there's a way of also social media doesn't help as well younger boys, because there's no face-to-face conversation, and there are other ways of abuse now, which are porn revenge or just using another platform to do exactly the same thing. But unless we start to, I think, deal with our conversation has gone to the point where actually it's the perpetrators who we should be focusing on. We should create shelters for women. We should set up systems in the legal system and in SAPS and in the medical system to immediately take care of a problem and remove the perpetrator in a humane way.
Yes,
maybe in a rehab thing, or alcohol addiction. And also, I mean, alcohol is a big issue in South Africa. It's difficult to talk about because people think you're calling for a ban, like level 5 ban. But we do need to talk about how we drink in South Africa. We have a big problem in this country, coupled with violence, and it isn't. I don't know how we're going to ever deal with that, because I think it does affect judgment and all sorts of other things. Yeah. And Jill, are you back?
Oh, I'm trying so hard to stay with you guys.
Shame. I know we so miss you every time you go. I'm sorry, Jill. Sorry.
I just want to say quickly, if I may add, I was a representative for the Witzenberg Abuse Crisis Center. That whole area had no safe house. So, and there's so much violence in that whole area, in Ceres. I would go down there and we would try to have fundraisers. It should be a law that there's, safe houses built. It should be an obligation of government to have these safe houses built. You understand? Because women that far out had to travel to Cape Town if they needed still raising money to try to get that safe house built down in Ceres. Can you believe that? It's incredible. I know that I've missed a lot of the conversation trying to get in and out, but I just heard that point on safe houses. And it's if anybody is thinking of wanting to start an NGO or something like that, they should really consider, because we do need more of those. That entire area down there, that there isn't a single safe house, and I cannot believe that it isn't a government obligation to do that. To see that there are enough safe houses for people, enough safe places for them to live.
It should be a provincial function as well, and municipal function. The next time anybody comes knocking on your door for a vote, I don't want to hear about the economy and the Guptas. I want to hear about, from my ward councillor, the money that you get from the taxes other people pay. Where's the safe house? I think education, political education around what your rights are, and that's just what we've got to start doing, is just taking those who we put into a position of power and we elect them and making them deliver, and say, next time you're out, we'll find our own, so there's possibilities in future with this new electoral act for people in communities themselves to take over the running of their communities. We mustn't underestimate this possibility around gender-based violence in the long run, but we need to think together, and there are enough people. Shame somebody, Adelbert has just said, every man has a woman inside him. That's a very beautiful way of putting it, Marianne. Well, it's true. You've got a lady in you, a woman in you. Your mother is in you. In some way, and her grandmother and her great-grandmother. Lucinda Evans, who I admire very much for her work, she says, can you please address no proper VEP services in police stations? I mean, Siobhan, what is your experience as a medical doctor in that realm, or your what?
Yeah, so I don't really work in the legal sphere of things, but I know, I was just thinking now, talking about the safe houses, I think that the VEP document does say that victims of domestic violence should be provided with shelter. So I think that there is something that can be drawn on to ensure that it happens. It just isn't happening. I think it's patchy. I think that the training is patchy. I think that some stations do very well, and probably most stations do very poorly, and the training isn't adequate. And I think most of the time people just get re-traumatized, but I can't speak to why that is, because I'm just not in that realm. I'm with the patient in front of me, so I'm not sure what's happening in terms of training. I know that they are supposed to be trained. They are supposed to be sensitized. It just doesn't seem to be filtering through on the ground.
I think until it's very hard for a victim of violence or a survivor to demand and have a sense of agency when you arrive. So that should all be in place. And I think, as Lucinda said at that big meeting with when we marched for Uyunene, we actually have to, as citizens, and like Sherman is interacting with men and trying to talk through what is the root of this. We should actually become more active in whichever region we're in. Just pop in at the police station, get off Netflix, get off your butt, go in and ask, where you have a right to do that. The cops might not like it, but I think the SATs need to know that actually we care about them. They work with us, their daughters, their mothers, their sisters are part of this, and we want to make something work in a country where we just mourn every day the levels of violence as well towards women and children and other men as a result of toxic patriarchy. It's just an economic deprivation. So these are also issues that need to be looked at, women's empowerment. Jill, have you got any more thoughts in terms of your experiences? We've got about 5 minutes left, and any more questions as well if anybody wants to ask us some more. I think Jill's frozen. I feel so. Are you there? You deserve a medal for tonight. Absolute medal. Gender Clean is asking you, Jill, a question. You mentioned that we should be communicating more at school. I agree, but we need more platforms, i.e., workplace, etc. Where do you see us creating more platforms, Jill, or how can we create more platforms?
Okay, I definitely think that it should definitely be. There should be platforms available, in community centers. I think that, we were speaking about policing and how people are received at the police station. I once went to try to get a protection order, and, people are so overworked. I really think it should be a total separate a wing. I mean, create work where you create jobs and train people up just for that specific purpose. For example, to receive people who are coming in needing protection orders or needing that kind of assistance. It shouldn't be a part of the normal police duties. I think it should be a completely separate, different part of the force that is trained to receive people coming in. And definitely at the workforce, I think this should be covered. At the workplace, there should be forums. There should be places available for men to go and get help. There should be places available, being made available, for example, in human resources. They should be discussing having these workshops at churches, at mosques, at schools. Life orientation. There should be, these things should be. There's space and place to have it. For example, sports, that's where you find a lot of soccer and rugby. When you're training these guys, have them come in for that type of talks too. Have those workshops running at sport clubs as well, because that's where men gather. This should be, if people are thinking about a reason to start an NGO, start one around this, start one around where you go around and you have these workshops happening in all these spaces where there's a concentration of men. I think bring it, cross bridges and bring it into these spaces.
And it's possible, I think that's the thing. The other thing I was thinking is that perhaps some of us should return to that thing of, as women, joining the police reserve, so that you spend 2 nights a week in a charge office near you, if you've got the time, or you want to give back to the community, and you are able to take a statement or be there, then offer your time. There are ways we can get ourselves into those police stations as well as citizens. And then all these other fora exist, and they're there. So, I get tired of us always saying we should be, and we just don't. And we keep, with COVID-19, we've seen how people did things for themselves a lot of the time. And GBV is going to be something we're going to have to do with existing structures, with existing, I think, activism. Sherman, you had your hand up there. You're already in the, doing the work you're supposed to do.
What I wanted to say was that I used to go to schools and do talks with the youngsters, and what was one of the topics I used to do, but I was told after a while that I needed to get permission from the Department of Education if I wanted to do any more work. But I was doing it free of charge as giving back to the community. But then I can't go through all of those documents, register myself and do all of that, because I don't have time for that.
Yeah,
so
I agree with you.
On my off days, I would phone a school and say, listen, do you have an hour for me? I'll go in and I'll do it. But when I started to get through all of that paperwork, I was like, okay, no, I need to stop for now. And then So there is platforms that we are trying to create as artists as well. We just need the backing of the Department of Education, of the SAPS units and things, so that we can be allowed to do these things.
And the Department of Arts and Culture and Sport,
Yeah, definitely.
because that money could go towards very much. I think it would go far. One school, you speak to a lot of people at one time, and people know what's going on. I mean, girls in this country are terrified. My daughters don't want to go out. Our daughters don't want to go out, and they're scared when they go out. And we have to make this world safer. We've got about 28, 29, 2 minutes left. I've really learned a lot from all of you, and I'm so sorry, Jill, that you've had to fade in and out like a ghost, but your contribution this evening was extremely valuable and vital to us trying to take this somewhere forward. And I think, I just want to say thank you to Kaka and Ka, and then it's called Unuku. I'm not sure who you are, but thank you to you also for the series of these talks. We don't have them enough. And for all of you who were here tonight, thank you for your time. Those of you who watched, thank you for your time and your questions. And I know many of you are survivors, and many of you work in the communities, doing work that is thankless. And you're my heroes, all of you, in the work you do in very bad time. So Nikki du Plessis ends by saying we need a multifaceted solution involving government and civil society. Well, yeah, we do. But until we do it, I think government doesn't come to the party. So next time they come knocking on your door, know what to ask them. Don't take the poster or the T-shirt. Ask them questions. Once again, thank you, Lo, for this film. Thank you all. Sharon Julius, thank you for your comment. Thanks for speaking out. Heavy burdens make the heart lighter. And this heart is heavy in South Africa. So thank you to all of you. And I'm hoping we can do this again. Thank you all for your work. Thanks, Sherman. Thanks, Siobhan. I'm sorry, Joel, you've left the room again. But we say bye. Thank you so much, everyone.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Marianne.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Ek het oor Baba gedroom.
Bly in die boks. Okay.
I just want to talk to you, please.
Hey, this is my boy. He's got a little red jacket on.
What's your name?
Carol.
What's the relationship between you and the boy?
Wasn't easy ride either. No, sister. Life is long. This is not the end.